Hello, local business owners. Today we're talking about URLs. You know, like the thing that you type in on the browser to go to your website. Well, it turns out that's an exciting world, and there's lots of things that you can do with your URL to rank faster, especially if you've never had a website before. So stay tuned. We're talking about URLs and which URL should you choose for your website. Hey guys, my name is Timothy, the host of Website Agency Podcast, and this is the podcast where local business owners begin to own their market through their websites. Today we're talking about URLs. I get this question all the time. What URL should I choose? Typically it's from new businesses opening up or businesses that have never had a website before and they're just getting around to it despite it being the year 2020. But either way, no matter where you are, as a business owner, whether you're super established or you have a website, it's important to revisit this topic because of how much influence your URL has over your search engine optimization. And so no matter if you have an existing website or you're just starting off, let's go over what URL you should choose and why. But let's cover our goals for today. So our goals for today are to understand the strategy behind URLs. So why pick a specific URL? Should you collect lots of URLs, etc.? Understanding how Google thinks about your URL in relationship to your website, and then a keyword URL versus a branded URL. So the first thing to make sure that we're all on the same page is that your URL is not your website. Your URL is simply the address of your website. Your website is the code. Your website is the graphics and the HTML and the CSS and everything that goes into what is being hosted. Your website can go to different URLs. So your website can actually change addresses. You can attach whatever URL you want to your website, but you have a main URL, and this main URL is telling Google what is the address of your website. And when Google wants to send traffic to a relevant home, the way I look at it is like someone wants to know where the Johnsons live. The Johnsons live at a particular house, but the Johnsons might move houses, right? And therefore have a different address. And that's how you can kind of think about your website. Google wants to know, I want to send traffic to the Johnsons. Someone Googles, they say, hey, where do the Johnsons live? And Google's going to say, I'm going to send it to this address. Well, the first thing that Google thinks about is what address are the Johnsons at? So in real life, right, you might search for Italian restaurant. And if you're searching for an Italian restaurant, Google's going to say, oh, this address is where an Italian restaurant is. So your URL is where your service is in the mind of Google. So when choosing a URL, it's all about telling Google what is at this address. So what is at your URL? So here is a handy dandy sketch that I made talking about how URL SEO works. So Google, that's people searching, right? That someone goes on Google and they're searching for products or services near them. Your URL is where you are, and your website is what you do or what you sell. So your website is who you are, your URL is where you are, and Google is someone that's searching for that. So what happens if your website SEO is non-existent? Okay, so where your website is supposed to say what you do or what you sell to Google, what happens if it doesn't say that? And so this would be businesses that don't rank on Google. So if you search for your keywords, let's say that you're a gym, and you search for personal trainer near me or personal trainer in Charlotte or whatever your keywords are, and you don't pop up, that means that Google is saying, we don't know what you're about. We don't know who you are. Your website, your code, your SEO on your website is not telling us what we need to know to deliver you as a trustworthy result when people search your keywords. And so even if your URL, if you're saying like, okay, we exist at this URL, if Google doesn't know what we exist means, then they're never going to show your URL. And so if your website SEO is non-existent, the first step to do is to get your website SEO figured out, which we talk about in further lessons. But there is a little bit of a shortcut, and that is making a keyword URL. So choosing a URL that is keyword rich. And so you can kind of hack this system by picking a URL that is your keyword. So for example, if you are a personal trainer in Charlotte and you own personaltrainingincharlotte.com, well, then Google's going to feel pretty confident that personaltrainingincharlotte.com is about those keywords. And so if your website SEO is non-existent, but you choose a keyword URL, then you're going to be able to bypass some of this system where Google is crawling your code on your website and still get traffic for that exact match keyword. So if you tell Google where you are is also what you are, that's going to help your SEO somewhat. A few reasons to choose a URL with your keywords in it. Number one is an instant SEO boost. So think about your keywords, where you are and what you offer. So gym in Charlotte, martial arts in Charlotte, Italian restaurant in Charlotte, something like that. Think about that URL and that would give you an instant SEO boost, especially if you're just starting off. And this means faster ranking, and that means faster getting more traffic and more leads right away. So if you're a new business starting off and that domain is available, it could really help you get started faster. And then also, your competitor can't use it. Some people want to buy this domain not to use it for themselves, but just to make sure that their competitors can't get it, which is also a valid reason to buy it and then to use it. And then also, I believe that some consumers look at your domain. If you have personal training in Charlotte, they're going to assume that the established, reputable, bigger brand in town owns that domain. I think a lot of consumers recognize that as an important domain and therefore would think that you are probably the biggest service provider in town if you own that domain. But there's also a few reasons not to use this URL with keywords in it. First of all, it's not branded to you. Personaltrainingincharlotte.com isn't your brand. It usually is a longer URL. And then also more specificity may result in too narrow a product scope. So what I mean by that is there was a karate school that had, karateintheirtown.com. And the challenge with that is when they started offering more than just karate, they started offering like fitness classes, they started offering BJJ. Well, now that their product scope is greater than just karate, they found that people looking for BJJ didn't actually convert at a higher percentage on their website because their URL was karate in Charlotte. And they struggled to rank for more keywords because they were so specific with their URL. So I would recommend a keyword-rich URL only if you have a very specific service and product that is one word and you intend that to be your business forever. Like Italian restaurant. If the Italian restaurant suddenly became like an Italian gelato shop, they maybe would struggle to rank for Italian gelato if their URL was just Italian restaurant. And then second of all, sometimes it's just too long. If you live it long, like it's just a lot of words, a lot of characters, and maybe for your literature, for your emails, or even just telling someone verbally, it's just a long URL. And then also, I think most importantly, it's maybe if you view it as a hack or a shortcut to get ranking on Google, you may not focus on your actual website SEO. And your website SEO is way more important than a keyword-rich URL because website SEO always trumps a keyword URL. And a great example of this is my own company, 97 Display. We outrank martialartswebsites.com. This is our number one keyword. We make websites for martial arts studios, and 97 Display.com outranks an exact match there. And that's because of all the SEO work that we've put into this domain. And now you're beginning to understand martial arts websites is what people are searching on Google. That is what we have. And where they find it is 97display.com. And that took some time for Google to recognize that 97 Display means martial arts websites. That took consistent SEO over years to make us rank number one for that. And so for you, owning a local business, don't rely on your domain. If you own a keyword-rich domain and that is your domain and you rank number one and you haven't focused on your website SEO, while you have that as an extra boost, it doesn't mean you're going to have it forever. So my Tim take is that for local brands just starting out, nab that URL if it's available. For established brands, don't switch your domain to a keyword-rich domain. Just keep your branded domain or whatever you have, and improve your website SEO if you're not ranking. And then for both of you, I would always nab that URL. I mean, on GoDaddy, URLs are $17. So buy that, hold it, so that way you make sure your competitors don't get it. Is it worth spending a ton of money to buy it off of someone else? Probably not. It just depends on what the keywords are. Now, of course, if you want to talk about this in more detail, reach out. Go to our website, connect with me, comment on this video, and we can talk about your specific situation. I love getting into the nitty-gritty with specific people. So in conclusion, remember, it all starts with your website, and your URL is a very important aspect of your website. And so good luck choosing your URL, improving upon your existing URL. I have another training coming out soon that is what to do if you own lots of URLs. So if you own like 10, 15, 20 URLs, which I talk about with some people, what to do if you have a lot of them, a good strategy for that. But until then, remember, it all starts with your website, and we'll talk soon.